Hello and welcome to another video. This isn't going to be a ranking necessarily, more of an overall review. This being the day that 23 years ago in 1998 that DMX, the recently deceased DMX, released his debut album, It's Dark and Hell is Hot. I decided to have a look at a series of songs that, in terms of performance, character work, storytelling, delivery, stand as one of pretty much his most important set of songs, being the Damien trilogy. So, on the first album, we had the track Damien. On the second album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood, we had the second track, The Omen. And on the Great Depression, later on, we would have the third track, Damien 3. So, yeah, just going to have a little exploration, discussion over all these tracks, give my overall review of them, and I just try and give a bit more background and context to them in terms of the story that they're telling. So again, we begin with the first track, Damien. So on the album, It's Dark and It's Hot, produced by Dame Grease, one of the main producers of Rough Riders, particularly at that point when Rough Riders was just kind of getting started. Produces a lot of the rest of the album, along with PK Killer tracks. So the story essentially begins with DMX kind of uncertain about about his life, feeling that everything he's doing is going wrong, and wishing he had someone like a guardian angel to look out for him, which is the cue for Damien to turn up. And yes, internets, DMX's Damien voice does sound a bit like Mos Def, but it's certainly not Mos Def. So Damien introduced himself as a friend to look out for DMX and to reward him with a lavish lifestyle, fortune and fame in hip hop, lots of women, all this kind of thing, which obviously DMX gets really stoked about. Calls his wife and his son, to tell him about meeting this person. Then in the second verse, we get a bit more of sort of the budding relationship between the two of them, and just the expansion of the idea of DMX going on, becoming leading more of a lavish lifestyle, taking trips overseas, and getting lots of drink and drugs from Damien. Lots of women to try and to have affairs with, which Damien will keep secret from anyone else. And then by the third verse, we get a bit more of the darker side of the relationship, as Damien reveals that he's been having some problems with some people, and he wants DMX to take care of them, which DMX does, because he wants to do whatever he can for Damien. After this, Damien still wants DMX to kill people. The next person being an old friend of DMX's, Sean, who was tight with in '89, Jay-Z. No. And after a bit of a deliberation about this, and killing somebody that ultimately was quite close to DMX, it's I mean it's implied that he goes through with it, even though it's not explicitly stated. And he certainly sees that he may have made an error in taking on this friendship, that things will probably only get darker and more morbid from here. And this is where the story ends in this chapter. After the final chorus and little outro, we get sort of distorted demonic voice saying that the story will be continued. Not quite those words. Anyway, if the voice is supposed to be DMX's or is Dame Grease, I don't think it's ever actually been clarified who the voice is. But anyway, so yeah, production-wise, like a lot of the album, it's quite minimalist and dark to match the nature of an album called It's Dark and Hell is Hot. The production is basically just some light drums with some eerie strings going over it, dipping in and out every now and again, but particularly prominent during the chorus. And if you think about its placement on the album as well, it's pretty much bang in the middle of the album, at track number 9, right after the arguably more disturbing track X Is Coming, and right before the easily lightest track on the album, How's It Going Down. So I suppose in a way, it's, again, I'm not sure whether this is necessarily not knowing how the album was sequenced necessarily, whether this was by design or just happened by coincidence. But it does kind of feel that its placement on the album is a way of kind of almost bridging the gap in a way of sort of like the first half of of the darkness of the album, leading into the bridge where it gets a bit more lighter for the second half of the album. It's not, How's It Going Down is easily the lightest track on the album, and there's certainly darker stuff that happens later on, but this is pretty much the darkest that it gets. This with Damien and X Is Coming together, it pretty much makes the rest of the album a lot less dark in comparison. And as I don't know if that's necessary by design or not, but it was an interesting thing to look at there. So then we go to the Omen on the second album, Flesh on My Flesh, Blood on My Blood, which was obviously released not too long after It's Dark and Hell is Hot. 7 months after, in fact. This one being produced by Swiss Beats, as the majority of the album was produced by Swiss Beats. Slightly different in terms of the production. It still keeps a very minimalist aesthetic. Being a Swiss Beats in kind of like the early Swiss Beats stage, it does have the kind of like Swiss Beats bounce to the track, but it's very subdued compared to the rest of the tracks that Swiss produces on the album and the songs it was producing at this time. It also notably features Marilyn Manson on the chorus. The chorus is worded slightly differently on this version. I don't know if that's just to match Manson's delivery of it better, or Manson just didn't listen to the chorus properly the first time around. But it doesn't take anything away. It's only a slight change from it. It doesn't take anything away from it. It still has the same sort of effect, but particularly with Marilyn Manson delivering it and having that sort of very eerie whisper to it, it makes it even more haunting than the initial DMX chorus in a way. Before the actual song begins, we have sort of intro skit, which doesn't happen on any of the other tracks in this series, where it's not necessarily established whether this is related to the storyline or not. But it's a hospital with a woman whose son is going to be taken away by the angel of death, essentially, and praying to God to not allow her son to die. Eventually, the creepy voice of the angel of death comes in and does evidently take away the life of this boy or man. Is not established how old this person is necessarily, or again whether this is part of the overriding story or not, or the story arc or anything like that. But it certainly sets the pace again, sets the tone again. Sorry for the eeriness and morbid nature of the songs. Although slightly amusing to me at the beginning is in the background, in the hospital, you hear calls for Dr. Forrest and Dr. Kravitz. It kind of makes me think of Forrest Whitaker and Lenny Kravitz. They could perhaps be playing the doctors, who knows? But that little thing aside, it is, again, setting the tone for the track. So the actual song begins with Damien telling DMX about how he's been sort of, taking care of him after he'd just been shot. It's not, again, clear whether this is a direct continuation of the events from the previous song. Given the discussion they have later on through the song about sort of the amount of killings that X has done by this point, it would indicate that there's been some passage of time. And so later we get references to a couple of kids who X is supposed to have killed. And I think, judging by the sounds of it, we're talking literal children that X is supposed to have killed. Again, making the things that he's having to do for Damien even more demented than some stuff from before. So just seeing how out of control this relationship is getting, and so throughout the first and the part way through the second verse, X is sort of going a bit back and forth with Damien, and Damien's kind of takes little antagonistic shots at him every now and again. And X is contemplating the relationship. The beginning of the second verse, he's starting to get to the point of wanting to try and get out of it, but then Damien calls him to inform him that his cousin, X's cousin, has been shot by police, and X realizes that the relationship is getting to the point that every time he has to do something for Damien, Damien's going to want something from him, but he also wants revenge for the fact that his cousin's been murdered, and so he seems to relent to working with Damien to get revenge on the police. In the third verse, it begins with the result of a bomb which has been set off, presumably to kill the police in revenge, and X realizing that this really has gotten to the limits now, and decides then and there that he's going to get out of the relationship. And of course Damien comes back in and sort of queries why he's trying to escape, essentially. Then the real argument sort of happens at this point of DMX wanting to be out, and Damien telling him, well, you're with me now. I've given you all these things, and I essentially own you. We get a little bit right near the end where Damien kind of reveals that, you know, essentially he has taken his soul. Is taking his soul. It's part of the bargain between the two of them, because DMX didn't say no to any of the stuff that Damien offered him, so he essentially handed his soul over to him. Um, Telling him that there's nothing free in this world. How would you have thought this relationship would work? The last two bars are X sort of delivering a prayer to try and escape from the clutches of Damien, and then we go on to the Marilyn Manson outro, slightly different from the original chorus, but still delivered in the same sort of tone. And then again we get the distorted demonic voice, slightly different from the outro to original Damien, so it may be a different voice. It's listed as Manson's voice, but I don't know if that's ever been clarified or confirmed. So again, it's no telling who the actual voice is, or if it's a combination of voices. But it's interesting because it's kind of like a traditional hip hop shout out for the outro of shouting out the artists and the collaborators, the producer, the company, being DMX, Marilyn Manson, Swiss Beats, Rough Riders, which we get on a big club track or a street collaboration or something like a lot of the traditional sort of hip hop tropey kind of tracks. But for a song like this, of this kind of nature, it's really interesting to kind of hear it, be flipped in that way. And again, there must be, I don't know, there's more of a reason for it other than just to flip that traditional idea of putting out for the outro. But it certainly works for the outro. And just go back again to getting Manson on the chorus for it. I mean, at this point, DMX had just sort of come about, but obviously sold quite a lot from It's Dark and Hell Heart. Made quite a big name for himself that quickly. So being able to get an artist outside of hip hop in that way, particularly at that time when it wasn't as common, sort of when outside the big moments of Run DMC and Aerosmith, Beastie Boys and Elvis Costello, and collaborations like that. This goes to show how quickly X's influence spreads, and his fan base, consisting of not just regular hip hop fans, but fans outside of hip hop as well. The fact that Swiss was able to get that collaboration with Manson, who wanted to work with DMX as well at that time. Again, it's sort of a nice way of just bridging those worlds and expanding X's fan base even more. So we then go on to Damien 3 for the Great Depression, the fourth album. So the third album didn't feature a Damien track, although there are a couple. Damien's voice appears on and then there was X. I think it's in Fame, but there's no tracks about Damien at all. So when we begin Damien 3, there's a reference to the fact that you didn't shout me out on your last album. There's nothing about me on the previous album. And just again talk about DMX's success at that point, which of course after and then it was X, which was his biggest selling album, his most successful commercially successful album. So it makes sense to to show from Damien's point of view about how far X had come at that point, and saying, it was all down to me. This is where the Damien 3 is kind of, as I say, it's not going to be a ranking necessarily, but the third one is kind of the weaker track of the trilogy, just because the crux of the track is, you have the chorus, which is fairly different from the first two, performed by X again, and Damien taking half of it as well. Just X talking about how Damien's influence is still, he still feels it everywhere, no matter where he goes, no matter what he does. And Damien talking about, what happened to our partnership, but this is essentially what the track is just about. Is DMX and Damien have already split essentially at this point, and it's basically the final chapter of the trilogy. But whereas it's the same amount of time has been spent on the ending of the story as the beginning of the story and as the middle of the story, which for a story like this I don't feel works quite as well, because it's basically, it didn't just devolves to DMX telling Damien that he's finished with him, Damien trying to tell DMX that it's a mistake to have left him, and this is basically just what the song is essentially, and until it ends with DMX doing another prayer to God to get Damien out of his life forever, which obviously did at the end of the Omen as well, but this is an extended version, and Damien tries to interrupt in between this. So it gives a happy ending essentially, even though it is kind of the ending that we already got with the Omen. And again, it's not a bad song at all. The production by PK Killer Tracks, or just PK as it was by this point, means that each of the tracks has essentially been produced by one of the main Rough Riders producers. So all three of them get a turn at producing a Damien track. So that's a nice tie-in there. The production is a bit more akin to the original Damien in the sense of, again, it's like the other ones, very minimalist, but it doesn't have Swiss's production had again a subdued production, but still had like the synth and the drums to it. This one is just drums and keyboard, pretty much similarly to how the first Damien was the drums and the eerie strings, and DMX's performance on the chorus is nice. That you get a bit more of a vocalization from him on this, rather than the more spoken words of the original chorus. And so they work well together as a trilogy, but again, the final one is a little bit, just of like an extended outro essentially. I was going to say as well, is it interesting that there was the gap between the tracks with the albums. I don't necessarily feel that would have this was done deliberately, but I think with the production for Damien 3, it's quite noticeable in that sense. I don't feel it would have necessarily fit on it, and then it was X, because of just how more polished and commercialized the production largely was on, and then it was X. So for the Great Depression, an album which is more about DMX's fame and his reflection on that, it does make a bit more sense for it to be on this album. At number 8 on the track list, not number 9 like the other two were, interestingly enough. But again, it's still the same sort of position on the album. Is roughly the middle of the album. Either it's not the exact same spot. And again, it kind of appears at a point just before some of the more overtly reflective tracks on the album. It comes just before When I'm Nothing, which again explores DMX's fame and the effect it's had on him, and before the track after that, I Miss You, talking about his deceased grandmother. So before some of the very reflective tracks on the album, this one does kind of come. It comes in that same group of kind of reflective tracks, even if this is more of a story rather than the more real life based When I'm Nothing and I Miss You. And again, looking at the overall story, while it's very clearly a fictionalized story, when you think about the DMX's sort of struggles with certainly with addiction and with mental health and bipolar disorder and sort of making characters to kind of help him cope with dark situations. You can kind of see how these tracks do parallel DMX's life as they were going, as it was going at the time, and through his career. Say beginning right at the start, where being kind of the lowly newcomer, becoming getting involved in the expanse of fame and fortune, and soon seeing the tolls it would take on him and the relationships he's having with people around him, and then going a bit later on in his career where he's kind of still dealing with that influence, even though he feels though feels that it's, he's trying to get it out of his life, because this is with Damien 3, that is where the story ends. There's been no further Damien tracks. This is quite clearly the end of it. But when you look at how DMX is how his life was going to play out in the 20 years after releasing Damien 3, he still had quite a few struggles, in terms of fame, in terms of the influence that drugs and everything around him was having on him. So in a way, even though Damien 3 ends with the prayer to get Damien out of his life, a lot of DMX's struggles didn't actually leave his life at that stage, which, when you reflect on that, does kind of make it a bit of a bittersweet ending in a way. But yeah, those are just some thoughts that I've been having, and just reflecting on those songs together as a package, as a storyline. Definitely a very strong series of tracks. Some of DMX's better ones that really show just what a great performer he could be. and it's certainly safe to say there won't be anyone else like him that ever comes around. So thank you DMX for the songs that you did provide us with in your lifetime, and maybe be able to look at other similar sets of tracks or something in the future. But that's just what I have to say for those. So thank you for listening, and hope to see you for more soon.